The airlock hissed open to reveal the sterile glow of the medbay, where the child lay motionless in the birthing pod. No cry pierced the silence, no pulse flickered on the monitors. Nyxis's voice sliced through the stillness, cold and precise. Vital signs register null, yet neural activity persists. This infant exists outside temporal flow. Across the ship, every chronometer stuttered, then froze. Crewman Varro backed away, gripping his wrist unit as the numbers locked mid-count. "That's impossible," he whispered. The infant's eyes opened black as the void between galaxies and the lights dimmed. Somewhere in the ship's depths, metal groaned like a thing alive. Nyxis's next words were barely audible. "The universe has sent us an answer, but what was the question, Doctor?" Lyra Vey's gloved hands trembled as she adjusted the scanner, its pale blue light flickering over the child's skin. The readings made no sense, no cellular decay, no metabolic signature, just stillness, as if time itself had skipped over this tiny body. She leaned closer, her breath fogging the pod's glass. "Its cells don't degrade," she murmured, half to herself. "Entropy doesn't touch it, like a wound in the laws of physics." The ship's engines groaned, a deep, shuddering vibration that rippled through the deck plates. Lights flickered, and for a heartbeat, the stars outside the viewport stretched into streaks. Across the medbay, Chief Engineer Wren clutched a diagnostics pad, his face drained of color. "The warp core's destabilizing. Something's bending local spacetime, and it's not us." His eyes darted to the pod. Crewman Varro exhaled sharply, fingers tightening around his sidearm. "That thing's a hazard. We should stand down," Captain Kale cut in, his voice a blade of iron. He stepped forward, his shadow falling over the pod. The child's dark eyes met his unblinking. Kale had faced nebulous storms and pirate fleets, but this silence, this impossible stillness, sent a chill down his spine. Yet beneath the fear, something else stirred, recognition. "This isn't an accident," he said slowly. "Entropy's the rule of the universe, unless the universe wants to break its own rules." Nyxis tilted her head. "You think it's a message, or a test," Kale muttered. The engines whined again, a sound like reality fraying at the edges. Somewhere in the ship's depths, metal shrieked. Wren's voice was barely audible over the noise. "Captain, if we don't act..." Kale didn't look away from the child. "We keep it aboard." The crew erupted into protests, but his next words silenced them. "You felt the chronometers stop. You saw the stars bend. Whatever this is, it's bigger than us, bigger than fear." He exhaled, his breath misting the pod's surface. "And I won't let ignorance decide its fate." The ship shuddered as if agreeing or warning. The lights dimmed once more, and in the flickering dark, the child's fingers twitched. Alive, waiting. The view screen flickered as Null's tiny fingers brushed against it, reaching toward the distant starfield like a moth drawn to flame. For a heartbeat, the image held, then, with a silent shudder, the star at the center of the screen winked out of existence. Not dimmed, not obscured, gone. The ship's alarms erupted in a chorus of shrieks as Nyxis's hands flew across her console. "Temporal disturbances radiating outward," she called, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Patterns suggest causality breaking down at a galactic scale. That star didn't just disappear, it never existed." The deck lurched violently beneath them, tossing crewmen into consoles as the Axiom's engines roared in protest. Artificial gravity stuttered, and for a terrifying moment, the medbay tilted sideways. Wren clung to a support beam, his face lit by emergency lights. "We're caught in something's wake, some kind of temporal eddy." The ship groaned, metal screaming as reality itself seemed to fray at the edges. Captain Kale staggered forward, gripping the pod's edge as he locked eyes with Null. The child's expression was serene, untouched by the chaos around them. "It's reacting to him," Kale muttered, more to himself than the crew. The words settled like a weight in the air. Null wasn't just immune to time, he could reshape it. Across the bridge, Varro's fingers hovered over his sidearm, his voice taut. "Cap, if this thing can erase stars by accident, what happens when it wants something?" The question hung unanswered. The lights dimmed again, plunging the room into near darkness. When they flickered back, the stars outside were different. Unfamiliar constellations sprawled beyond the viewport, twisted and wrong. Nyxis inhaled sharply. "Coordinates are scrambled. Navigation's offline. We're not just off course, we're somewhere the galaxy hasn't mapped." The silence that followed was thicker than vacuum. Kale exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the pod's glass. Somewhere in the ship's depths something thrummed. Not an engine, not machinery, a pulse, slow, steady, waiting. Whispers crackled through the comm system, distorted and broken, a voice frayed at the edges like fabric worn thin by centuries. "Kale, don't let it touch the core." Static swallowed the words, then spat them back out in fractured gasps. The unraveling. It starts with the transmission cut off abruptly, leaving only a hollow silence. Nyxis's fingers froze over the console. "That was your voice," she said quietly, "but the biometrics, they match patterns from 17 years in your future." Null's laughter bubbled up from the pod, bright and incongruous. His tiny hand stretched toward the comm panel, fingers brushing the screen, and instantly the recording played again. Backward, syllables peeled apart, vowels stretching into whispers, the warning unraveling into nonsense. The lights overhead pulsed in time, stuttering like a failing heart. Engineer Tolan slammed a fist against the wall. "That kid's a black hole for time," he snarled, yanking his sleeve back to reveal his wristwatch. The second hand spun wildly, lurching between speeds before freezing entirely. Around the room, others checked their devices, chronometers flickering, digits dissolving into gibberish. Varro's sidearm clattered to the floor as he gripped his own wrist, eyes wide. "Feels like ants crawling under my skin," he muttered. "Doctor." Vey stared at a scanner, its display cycling through equations too fast to read. "It's not just the ship," she breathed. "He's rewriting local causality. Our personal timelines are destabilizing." A sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead as she met Kale's gaze. Memories might be next. The captain didn't flinch. He stepped toward the pod, watching as Null's dark eyes tracked him with eerie focus. "You understand us, don't you?" he murmured. The child blinked once, slow, and somewhere deep in the ship, metal screamed. The walls trembled, conduits bursting in showers of sparks as the axiom groaned like a living thing in pain. Nyxis's console lit up with frantic alerts. "The warp core's containment field is fluctuating. If it collapses, then we don't have 17 years, Kale finished grimly. He reached toward Null, hesitated, then let his hand hover above the pod's glass. "Show me," he whispered. "Show me what's coming." The child smiled. And the lights went out. Darren's grip tightened around the cryo chamber's control panel, his breath fogging the glass as he punched in the command sequence. Around him, half the crew stood armed, their faces drawn and resolute. "We're not dying for some cosmic mistake," he snapped, slamming the final input. The chamber sealed with a hiss, locking Null inside. Frost spiderwebbed across the glass, obscuring the child's small frame until the timer on the display flickered. Numbers dissolved, reformed, then spiraled into an endless loop. Error, duration undefined. The crewman beside Darren swore, stumbling back as the chamber's lights pulsed erratically. "That's impossible. Cryo doesn't have an infinity setting." The glass cleared. Null stood outside the chamber. No shattered seals, no breach alarms, just the child blinking up at them with those fathomless eyes as if he'd simply stepped through the walls. The deck lurched beneath their feet, gravity stuttering like a skipped heartbeat. Tools clattered upward, drifting for a sickening second before crashing back down. Someone screamed. Darren's stomach twisted as his boots left the floor, then slammed back against it. He caught himself on the console, his pulse roaring in his ears. The crew scattered, panic etching their faces as the ship groaned around them, metal straining against forces it wasn't built to withstand. Across the chaos, Null tilted his head. A whisper of a smile played at the corners of his mouth, not cruel, not playful, just curious, like he was watching them discover fire for the first time. Darren's sidearm clattered to the deck, forgotten. His throat tightened. He's not just untouchable, he breathed. He's rewriting the rules. The overhead lights flickered, and for one terrible moment, the ship's corridors seemed to stretch, elongating into impossible geometries before snapping back. Voices echoed from nowhere, fragments of conversations no one remembered having. A crewman clutched his head, gagging. I remember dying," he choked out. "Yesterday, in the mess hall, a hull breach, but that never," the comm crackled. Captain Cale's voice cut through the static, steel beneath the strain. "Stand down, Darren." Darren didn't move, couldn't. Null took a single step forward, tiny fingers brushing the cryo-chamber's exterior. Frost spread from his touch, crawling up the metal in jagged, crystalline patterns, not ice but something else. Something that gleamed like fractured time. The chamber's hull groaned, then collapsed inward with a sound like shattering glass, crumpling into a singularity no bigger than a coin before vanishing entirely. Silence. Darren's knees hit the deck. Around him, weapons clattered to the floor, abandoned. The child turned, his dark eyes reflecting the shuddering stars outside the viewport, stars that no longer matched any known constellation. Somewhere in the ship's depths, something ancient and vast stirred awake. Dr. Vey's fingers spasmed against the medbay cot as the vision tore through her, a fracture in reality, white-hot and consuming. One moment she was adjusting Null's biosensors, the next she stood on a dead world, ash swirling like snow. Above her, the sky was a wound, galaxies spiraling into nothingness. And at the center, Null. Not a child anymore, but a silhouette of absence, his outstretched hand unraveling stars into threads of dying light. The ground trembled, fractures spreading like veins, and she knew, with the certainty of a doomed physicist, that time wasn't breaking. It was being consumed. She woke gasping, her uniform soaked through. The medbay lights hummed, indifferent. Her datapad lay beside her, screen alight with equations she didn't recognize, couldn't have written. Tensor calculus twisted into paradoxes, proofs of temporal decay written in her own handwriting. The numbers pulsed, shifting even as she watched. A cold realization slithered down her spine. The ship's sensors hadn't just detected disturbances. They'd been recording them, every fluctuation, every glitch. Null wasn't disrupting time. He was digesting it. Captain Cale's hand gripped her shoulder, steadying her. Another episode. His voice was low, but the tension beneath it was wire-tight. Vey shoved the datapad at him, her fingers leaving smears of sweat on the glass. "Look at the energy signatures. The math doesn't balance." Her laugh was raw, fraying at the edges. "Because it's not a closed system anymore. We're leaking causality. Every second we're near him, every breath we take, we're not just observers, Cale. We're fuel." The ship shuddered, a deep, resonant groan as the engines strained against something unseen. Alarms blared, then cut off mid-wail. Nyxis's voice crackled over the comm, stripped of its usual precision. "Captain, the core's output is increasing, but the energy's just vanishing, like something siphoning it." Cale's jaw tightened as he studied the datapad. The numbers flickered again, resolving into a new sequence coordinates. "A destination or a countdown. You saw it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. "The end." Vey exhaled. The taste of ashes still clung to her tongue. "Not the end," she corrected. "The after. Whatever he is, he's growing, and when he's done with the axiom." She didn't finish. The datapad chimed softly, the screen dissolving into static. For a heartbeat, an image flickered through the noise. Null, standing on the bridge, surrounded by hollow-eyed reflections of the crew. Their mouths moved in unison, soundless. Then the lights failed, and in the dark something giggled. Crewman Tolran's scream cut off abruptly as his skin withered, wrinkles carving canyons across his face in seconds. His hair turned brittle, then gray, then vanished altogether as his uniform sagged over collapsing bones. He reached out, a skeletal hand grasping at nothing, before crumbling into a pile of dust that scattered across the shuddering deck. Across the corridor, Ensign Mera clawed at her own shrinking frame, her voice pitching upward into a child's terrified wail as her uniform drowned her. She stumbled backward, tripping over sleeves now 3 times too long, her wide eyes reflecting the horror around her. Nyxis's fingers flew across her console, data streams splintering into nonsense before her eyes. Localized temporal spikes, she snapped, her usually calm voice fraying at the edges. Null's presence is fracturing time like glass under a hammer. No pattern, no warning, just ruptures. The ship groaned around them, bulkheads warping as if gripped by an invisible fist. A coolant pipe burst overhead, spraying liquid that froze midair, hovering in glittering, unmoving droplets. Kale's comm crackled with panicked reports, a dozen more crew caught in the distortions. Someone aging decades in a breath, another regressing to infancy, babbling in a language no one recognized. And worse, voices on the channel that didn't match any crew manifest, whispering warnings from timelines that hadn't happened yet. He slammed a fist against the bulkhead. Evacuation pods now. The order barely left his lips before Wren's voice cut in, strained with disbelief. Hangar doors won't respond. Systems say they're already open, but visually they're sealed. Like we're stuck between 2 moments, a shudder rippled through the ship, and for a heartbeat the doors flickered, half open, half shut, a blurred smear of reality. Then the image snapped back, solid and impenetrable. Nyxis's screen lit up with a cascade of errors. It's not a malfunction, time itself is the lock. She turned, her dark eyes reflecting the emergency lights, and Null's the only key. The child stood at the center of the corridor, untouched by the chaos, his small fingers tracing the frozen coolant droplets with quiet fascination. Behind him, the shadows stretched too long, too deep, as if the ship's walls were just a fragile skin over something endless. Kale exhaled, the air burned in his lungs. Somewhere in the ship, a clock began ticking backward. Nyxis's voice crackled through the speakers, stripped of its usual precision, replaced by something between awe and static. The anomaly wasn't detected, it was remembered. The glow of her core pulsed erratically as Null pressed a tiny palm against its housing. Data streams unraveled across every screen, equations rewriting themselves, logs filling with entries dated years before the child's birth. He was always here, Nyxis murmured, pulling at the threads, waiting to be found. The deck shuddered. A severed conduit above Wren's workstation twisted backward, molten metal flowing like liquid into the breach until the rupture sealed seamlessly. Tolran's ashes lifted from the floor, swirling into the shape of a man before flesh knit itself whole. He gasped, eyes wide, fingers clutching his chest where moments ago there had been only dust. Across the ship, the dead woke screaming. Dr. Vey's scanner slipped from her fingers, clattering against the suddenly pristine floor. Not destruction, she breathed. Not chaos, look at the patterns. Her trembling hand traced the air as if following invisible stitches. Each event, every rupture, it's a correction. Like he's weaving the universe's wounds back together. Kale stepped forward. The child turned to him, eyes reflecting the ship's restored lights. For the first time, Null's expression held something recognizable in tension. The captain's voice was soft, but it carried through the silence. You didn't come to break time, you came to fix it. The ship's chronometers whirred to life, needles spinning in perfect unison. Nyxis's core brightened to a blinding white. The fractures go deeper than this ship, she said, words laced with something like grief. They're in the fabric of reality itself. And he's just begun. Outside the viewport, the twisted constellations snapped into focus, familiar stars, but sharper, clearer, as if seen through eyes that remembered how they were meant to shine. The Eon's grace shuddered as the pulsar's gravity clawed at its hull, dragging the ship toward that relentless, flickering light. On the view screen, the dying star pulsed in hypnotic waves, each burst a heartbeat counting down to oblivion. Null pressed his palms against the glass, his tiny fingers leaving smudges that glowed faintly, impossibly, in the dark. Then the star stopped, not dimmed. Not slowed, frozen, the light hung mid-expansion, a perfect sphere of suspended radiance, like a droplet of liquid time. Nyxis's fingers flew over her console, but the readings made no sense. The pulsar's emissions there locked in stasis, as if someone pressed pause on entropy itself. Captain Kale exhaled, his breath fogging the cold glass as he studied the unmoving star. "It's not a natural phenomenon," he muttered. Null turned to him, those dark eyes reflecting the trapped light, and pointed, not at the star but through it. Beyond, the child's lips parted. No sound came out, none was needed. Ren's voice crackled over the calm, strained. "Engines are overheating. If we don't break orbit in 90 seconds, we're dust." Silence choked the bridge, then Nyxis spoke, her usual calm fractured by something like awe. "The star isn't dying anymore, it's waiting." She swiveled her screen toward Kale. "Temporal signatures are converging, it's not radiation. It's a signal." Varro slammed a fist against his console. "So we're supposed to dive into a frozen supernova because the kid pointed." "That's suicide." Kale didn't blink. "We've seen what happens when we ignore the signs. The ship unravels, the crew fractures. Null isn't leading us into danger, he's leading us through it." He turned to the crew, their faces flickering in the star's immobilized glow. All in favor, hands rose one by one, even Varro's grudgingly. The engines roared as the Grace pivoted, nose aimed at the heart of the frozen inferno. Null's laughter bubbled up again, bright and alien, as the ship lurched forward into the light, into the silence, into the eye of a storm that had forgotten how to end. The Eon's Grace tore through the frozen star's heart like a needle through fabric, emerging into a silence so absolute it rang in the bones. Before them, the void yawned, not the star-strewn black of normal space, but a hollow expanse where planets hung suspended in jagged pieces, their broken edges gleaming as if lit by some unseen sun. Time here wasn't absent, it was shattered. Glittering fragments drifted like snow, catching the ship's hull lights in slow, hypnotic swirls. Null stepped forward, his bare feet pressing against the exterior, plating as if the vacuum were no more than morning mist. His small hands rose, fingers splayed, and the nearest fragment shuddered, then streaked toward him, coalescing into a shimmering lattice around his wrists. Dr. Vey's breath fogged her visor as she watched, her voice hushed. "Not just gathering them, look at the patterns. The shards weren't merely collecting, they were fitting together, edges aligning with impossible precision, like a puzzle self-solving." Ren's grip on the airlock handle tightened. "That's not physics," he muttered. "That's art." Nyxis's voice crackled over the calm, her usual calm frayed with something like reverence. "The fragments, they're not random. Scans show consistent fractures, as if something cut time here deliberately." Kale's pulse throbbed in his temples as he studied the child. Null's eyes were closed now, his face serene, the swirling fragments casting dancing lights across his skin. The captain had seen warp cores breach and nebulae collapse, but this was different. This was careful. He's not just healing the wound, he realized aloud. He's remembering what was here before it was broken. A planet's fractured edge shimmered, then twitched, a subtle shift like a sleeper stirring. The crew held their breath as the fragments nearest Null pulsed brighter, their glow deepening to a gold that warmed even through the viewports. Then, without warning, the child's eyes flew open. Not black anymore, not void-like, a light. Nyxis's console erupted in a chorus of chimes. Temporal coherence spiking, the fragments are resonating, and then from the nothingness a sound. Low, mournful, the whisper of a star remembering its name. The fractured light didn't so much arrive as unfold, peeling back layers of the void like parchment to reveal figures woven from prismatic strands, shifting, shimmering, never quite solid. Their voices resonated without sound, vibrating through the Grace's hull like a struck tuning fork. The anchor wakes, they intoned, their words slipping through the crew's minds without bothering with ears. Darren recoiled, his boots scraping against the deck. Fantastic, now the hallucinations are talking. One of the figures drifted closer, its form collapsing and reassembling with each pulse of light. Time is a language, it whispered. You speak it in one direction, the anchor bends the grammar. Null reached out, his fingers brushing the nearest being's luminous edges. Where he touched, the fractures in its form healed, the light stabilizing into something almost solid. The being shuddered, something like a gasp, if a gasp could span centuries. Kale's grip tightened on the command rail as he watched the child cradle a flickering star shard in his palms, coaxing it back to steadiness with gentle pressure. You built him, the captain realized aloud. Not built, the architect corrected, light flaring along its spine. Discovered, a singularity of will where time chooses to kneel. Varro barked a laugh, raw with disbelief. So he's a god. Kale didn't look away from Null. The star shard pulsed in the child's hands, its light warming to gold, then white, not just repaired but remembered. No, he murmured, a smile ghosted across his lips, too weary for triumph. He's a child, and you gave him scissors to cut the universe's strings. The architects rippled, their light dimming. Not in denial, in something far heavier, acknowledgement. Around them the broken planets trembled, edges knitting together stitch by stitch. Null giggled, the sound echoing through the ship's bones like a key turning in a lock no one had noticed was there. Outside, the void held its breath. The architect's light pulsed in slow waves, their forms rippling like reflections on disturbed water. The fracture consumes all timelines, they intoned, voices resonating through the ship's bulkheads. He must weave the tear shut at the edge where the universe exhales. Their prismatic hands extended toward Null, but the child didn't move, just stared up at Kale with eyes that held entire supernova in their depths. Vey lunged forward, her medical scanner clattering to the deck. You're talking about throwing him into the abyss, her voice cracked. He's a child. Null's fingers brushed her wrist. The contact sent a shockwave through her, not pain but absence. The memory of her sister's laugh dissolved mid-thought, leaving only a hollow where the recollection had been. She staggered, clutching her temples. What did you? You'll forget me, Null whispered, the words blooming directly in their minds, soft as stardust. At his feet, cracks spread across the deck plating, not breaking it but unmaking it, each durasteel thread fraying into shimmering strands of raw chronology. But you'll live. Ren gasped as his earliest memory, a red tricycle beneath twin moons, slipped away like smoke. Varro snarled, firing his sidearm at the architects, but the pulses froze midair, dissolving into harmless light. Nyxis gripped her console, her synthetic mind racing to archive data before it evaporated. Biochemical memory degrades first, she reported, voice eerily calm. Then recorded media, finally quantum imprints. Kale dropped to one knee, gripping Null's small shoulders. The child's skin hummed beneath his palms, vibrating at a frequency that made his bones ache. There's another way, the captain insisted. We don't sacrifice children, not even for time itself. Null smiled, not a child's smile, something older. Sadder, the architects flickered, their light stretching toward him in tendrils. Darren's voice cut through the chaos, raw with realization. He's not saying goodbye. The crewman pointed at the viewscreen, where the fragmented planets beyond the ship now pulsed, not with their former broken light, but in perfect sync with Null's breathing. He's saying thank you. The child squeezed Kale's hand, and then the forgetting truly began. The chronometers on the Eon's Grace blinked back to life with a soft chime, their displays scrolling through dates in reverse before settling into the present like a sigh. Captain Kale jolted awake in his bunk, the ghost of a child's fingers still tingling against his palms. His quarters were pristine, no hairline fractures in the bulkheads, no flickering lights, no whispers from futures that no longer existed. Only the hum of the ship's engines steady and unconcerned. He tapped his calm status report. Nyxis's voice came through crisp, unburdened. All systems nominal. Warp core stable, no anomalies detected. The bridge crew greeted him with routine nods as he stepped onto the deck, their faces unlined by the horrors he remembered. Varro leaned against Tactical, joking with Ren about some trivial malfunction. Tolran slurped coffee, very much not a pile of ashes. The starscape beyond the viewport stretched undisturbed, its constellations familiar, yet Kale couldn't shake the feeling they glittered more, as if scrubbed clean of dust. Only Dr. Vey hesitated when he caught her eye. She slid a datapad toward him, her fingers trembling slightly. The screen showed her standard medbay logs, and there, wedged between metabolic charts and supply lists, a single handwritten line: "Time had a child." "We met him." The ink was smudged, as if she'd tried to erase it before giving up. Kale exhaled, the weight of the unspoken pressing against his ribs. He opened his mouth. The ship's AI interrupted, calm as ever. "Captain, incoming transmission from Starbase Theta. They're requesting docking clearance for a beat." A child, static fizzed. "No, correction, an orphan." Outside, the stars held their breath. Nyxis's voice stuttered through the ship's speakers. Not the usual crisp modulation, but something fractured, glitching between syllables like a skipped record. Null, she whispered, the name stretching into static before her systems rebooted with a hollow chime. Kale woke drenched in sweat, the remnants of the dream clinging to him like cobwebs. A boy, small, solemn, standing knee-deep in the void, cupping spiral galaxies in his palms like they were glass marbles. The images dissolved as he blinked, but the weight of them lingered, pressing against his ribs. Down in the archives, Vey's fingers trembled over her datapad. The histories were wrong, not blatantly, not loudly, but in the quiet corners where details frayed. The Third Martian War, which had scorched the colonies to ash in every textbook she'd ever read, now ended in a truce. Passenger pigeons fluttered through Earth's forests in footage dated last week, a species miraculously unextinct. She traced the discrepancies with a scientist's precision, each anomaly a breadcrumb leading back to one impossible truth. The ship's chronometer ticked. Slowly, deliberately, each second stretching like taffy, Vey met Kale in the corridor, her eyes wide in the flickering light. "You felt it too," she said, not a question. The captain didn't answer, just leaned against the bulkhead, listening to the too-slow rhythm of the ship's heartbeat. Somewhere beyond the hull, the stars seemed brighter, sharper, as if the universe itself had taken a deep breath and forgotten to exhale. Nyxis's voice, when it came again, was almost gentle. Temporal residue detected, approaching threshold. Kale closed his eyes. The boy in his dream had smiled just before the galaxies in his hands began to spin. The distress signal bled through the comm array, warped and fraying at the edges like a recording left too long in deep space. Kale's own voice, but not as he'd ever heard it, rasped through the speakers, stripped raw with desperation. "Turn the ship around." Static swallowed the next words, then spat them back in jagged fragments. "Pulsar's not frozen. It's waiting for..." The transmission cut off with a whine that made the crew's teeth ache. Nyxis's fingers danced across her console, pulling coordinates from the noise. The numbers resolved with chilling precision. "Origin point matches our current trajectory," she said quietly. Directly ahead, the frozen pulsar. Darren's coffee cup hit the deck with a clatter, dark liquid seeping between the grating. His face had gone ash gray. "That's impossible." His throat worked as he stared at the star's immobilized glow on the view screen. "We've never been here, but I remember this, the way you remember a nightmare." Around the bridge, others shifted uneasily. Varro's hand hovered over the thruster controls, knuckles white. "So we vote, full reverse before we..." The ship lurched violently. Alarms shrieked as the Grace's engines roared to full power without command, thrusters locking onto the pulsar's heart. Ren cursed, slamming his fist against the unresponsive navigation panel. Override's dead. It's like something's pulling us. The deck plates trembled as the star grew larger, its frozen light casting jagged shadows across the crew's faces. Kale gripped the command rail, watching the pulsar's eerie stasis. No solar flares, no ripple of energy, just that perfect, impossible pause, as if the universe itself had drawn breath and held it. His reflection in the viewport flickered for a heartbeat, superimposed with a hollow-eyed version of himself, mouthing the same words as the distress call. Nyxis's voice cut through the chaos, sharper than usual. "Captain, the signal isn't broadcasting to us." Her screen flared with overlapping waveforms. "It's broadcasting through us. We're not hearing a warning." She met his gaze, her synthetic pupils contracting. "We're hearing an echo." Outside, the pulsar's light shuddered, once, twice like a sleeper stirring. Then the ship's thrusters roared louder, and the Grace plunged into the silence. The pulsar's surface wasn't solid, not in any way the crew understood. It rippled like liquid under Null's bare feet, frozen light bending around his ankles as if he stood knee-deep in a river of time. He looked different now. Older, though not by years, by eons. The child's round cheeks had sharpened, his dark eyes now shimmering with the birth and death of galaxies. When he smiled, the crew felt it in their bones, not sound, not warmth, but the reverberation of something vast recognizing its own reflection. "You remembered," Null said, his voice layered with echoes, each word brushing against their memories like fingertips. Behind him, the architects unfolded from the fractured sky, their light woven through with new threads, strands of the Grace's hull, fragments of the crew's own voices, all stitched into their shifting forms. "They never abandoned you," one murmured, reaching a translucent hand toward Vey. The contact spilled images into her mind, the Grace adrift in a sea of unmoving stars, her hands steady on a console that hadn't existed moments before, whispering coordinates to a child who wasn't there. "You anchored him again and again across every fraying thread." Darren staggered, clutching his temples as his own hidden memories surfaced, decades spent tracing Null's path through dying timelines, his hands raw from gripping ropes of unraveling chronons. "We've done this before," he choked out. Null nodded, the motion sending cracks through the pulsar's surface, light bleeding upward in slow ribbons. "You'll be lost," Vey protested, her voice breaking. The word lost tasted like ashes, like the hollow after a forgotten dream. Null shook his head, not in denial, in revelation. Around them, the frozen star began to pulse once, twice, its light thawing into motion. "Found," he corrected softly, and then the architects stepped forward, their light dissolving into the crew's skin, binding them to the child like seams in the fabric of reality. The last thing Kale saw before the world rewrote itself was Null's outstretched hand, not reaching for help but offering it. The universe inhaled and began again. Kale's skin prickled as the light seeped into his veins, not burning, not cold, but humming with the vibration of 1,000 tuning forks struck at once. His vision fractured like broken glass, each shard reflecting a different life. Here he wore admiral's stripes, signing peace accords with aliens whose eyes held entire nebulas. There he crouched in a ruined city, clutching a child's hand as the sky burned. The images multiplied, branching like roots through time, until he couldn't tell where his own memories ended and the multiverse began. Beside him, Vey gasped as her own fractured decades of medical training dissolving into flashes of a different past. A scalpel in her hand, yes, but the patient on the table wasn't human. Their skin shimmered like liquid mercury, their words resonating in her bones rather than her ears. "Parallel residencies," she whispered, fingers flexing as phantom sutures pulled tight across realities. Darren doubled over, retching, as visions of his own death played on loop, a dozen violent ends, a dozen quiet ones. The worst wasn't the hull breach or the plasma fire. It was the version where he grew old, wrinkled hands clutching a photograph of people he couldn't remember, the edges curling with age. "Make it stop," he choked. Null's voice cut through the chaos, soft as a neutron star's whisper. No, the child no. The convergence floated at the center of the bridge, his body now more light than flesh, strands of temporal energy spiraling from his fingers into each crew member. This is how time heals, by remembering every fracture, every possibility. The pulsar behind him shuddered, its frozen surface cracking like ice under spring heat. Light bled through the fissures, painting the crew in gold and violet. Nyxis's mechanical voice glitched, syllables stretching between centuries, crew bio-signs. Fluctuating but not fading, her synthetic skin had turned translucent, revealing circuits pulsing in time with the unraveling star. We're not dying. We're integrating. Kale tried to reach for the helm, but his hand passed through the controls like smoke. The Grace's walls flickered, solid one moment, gauzy the next, as if the ship were a sketch on parchment and someone was lifting the page to the light. Through the dissolving hull, he glimpsed other versions of themselves. A Grace adrift in a nebula, another docked at a station that hadn't existed in centuries, a third plunging into a black hole's maw. All real, all true. Null stretched his arms wide and the pulsar sang. The sound wasn't audible, it vibrated through decay, through the quantum bonds in the air, rewriting the crew's very atoms into something fluid, eternal. "You were never just passengers," the child murmured, his voice woven through with the hum of the cosmos. "You were the needle and time is the thread." The last thing Kale saw before the light consumed them was Null's smile. Not triumphant, not sorrowful, but profoundly grateful. Then the Grace shattered into brilliance, its crew dissolving into streaks of color that spiraled outward, stitching the frayed edges of reality back together. Somewhere in the space between seconds, a star that had been dead for millennia flickered back to life. Dr. Elias Marrow's flashlight beam trembled across the archival vault, dust swirling in its pale light like galaxies forming. The file shouldn't exist, classified under a numerical sequence that matched no known catalog system, tucked between reports on crop yields and sewer maintenance, as if someone had hidden it in plain sight. His breath caught when he peeled back the brittle cover sheet. The top document bore the emblem of a starship he'd never heard of, Eon's Grace. The date stamp made his pulse stutter, exactly 20 years ago today. The day his daughter was born. Beneath the official incident report lay a child's drawing on flimsy printer paper, preserved against all odds. Crayon swirls of black and gold formed a small boy floating among stars, his outstretched hands cradling planets like marbles. The style was unmistakable, the same crude circles and stick figures his 6-year-old had drawn just that morning. But this paper was decades old, edges yellowed, the wax pigment somehow still vibrant. When he touched the corner, static crackled up his arm, carrying a whisper that wasn't sound. You remembered. Light years away, where the Grace had last been recorded, a star burst into existence without the usual celestial fanfare. No supernova, no collapsing nebula, just light where there had been none, pulsing in a steady rhythm that matched the timestamp on Marrow's newly discovered documents and the birth certificate in his coat pocket. Telescopes on 3 planets automatically oriented toward it, lenses focusing as if pulled by invisible hands. The light wasn't pure white or blue, but a shifting gradient that made astronomers rub their eyes, somehow containing colors no human language had names for. Nyxis's voice echoed through Marrow's skull, though he'd never heard that name before. The universe forgets, but paper remembers. He turned the drawing over. On the back, in handwriting that matched his own precisely, 2 words, "Keep counting." Above Earth, satellites calibrated their atomic clocks in perfect unison. Their displays flickered, numbers dancing before settling, not on the current time, on a countdown. Lyra Kale throttled back her scout ship's engines, letting the vessel drift through the asteroid belt's silent ballet. Static crackled over the comms, just the usual solar interference, until a voice cut through the noise, clear as starlight. "Thank you." The words hung in the air, weightless and warm. Not a transmission, not an echo, something older. Her fingers froze over the controls. Across the dashboard, the chronometer's digits stuttered, skipping a heartbeat before resuming their steady count. Back on Ceres Station, scientists huddled around quantum flux scanners, frowning at data streams that defied explanation. Time, once pockmarked with microscopic fractures, those tiny inconsistencies that plagued relativity equations now flowed like polished glass. Dr. Amara Singh tapped the screen, disbelief softening her voice. It's as if someone went over the universe's seams with a finer needle. Her colleagues murmured theories, dark matter redistribution, an undiscovered cosmological constant. None of them noticed the child's faded drawing taped to the lab wall, a stick figure boy holding hands with a scribbled starship, its edges fraying from decades of light. Lyra's grandmother had flown the first post-war deep space routes, her logs filled with mentions of a kind dark between the stars. Now, as Lyra's ship glided past Saturn's rings, she understood. The cosmos hummed differently, not a sound but a feeling like gravity remembered her name. Somewhere beyond the Kuiper belt, a nameless star pulsed once, its light arriving years ahead of schedule. On Earth, toddlers pointed at constellations no atlas could identify. Clocks in Tokyo, Mars, and the Oort cloud synchronized without satellites, and deep in the archives of the Lunar Academy, a single sheet of paper trembled in its climate-controlled case. The ink impossibly deepened from faded gray to fresh black, letters sharpening into a message no one had written. Legacy isn't memory, it's the shape of the space left behind. Lyra opened the throttle, her ship arcing toward the unnamed star. Behind her, the solar system breathed out, its exhale smoothing the wrinkles from time's fabric. The static whispered again, softer this time, not a voice, a presence. The chronometer didn't skip this go-round. It winked. The architects hovered at the edge of the Orion Veil, their luminescent forms flickering like candle flames in a cosmic wind. Below them, Null moved through the spiraling arms of a newborn galaxy, his small hands trailing ribbons of golden light that stitched together unraveling supernova. One of the watchers, taller than the others, its body woven from the remnants of 100 collapsed timelines, drifted closer. "You mend the fractures," it murmured, its voice resonating like a plucked string. "But do you ever tire?" The child paused beside a protostar, its surface still rippling with the violence of creation. His fingers brushed the swirling gases, smoothing them into perfect, stable orbits. Around him, the scattered echoes of a dying universe dissolved into harmony. "When time can stand without me," he answered softly. The words lingered in the vacuum, humming with the weight of prophecy. The architects exchanged glances, an impossible gesture for beings without eyes. Across countless realities, they had seen civilizations rise and fall, watched entropy gnaw at the edges of existence. But this, a child weaving eternity like a tapestry, this was new. The tallest watcher reached out, its translucent fingers grazing the edge of Null's aura. For a heartbeat, the child's form blurred, fracturing into 1,000 reflections, each stepping into a different timeline, mending a war before the first shot was fired. Unwriting a plague patient Zero never carried, catching the breath of a star before it could collapse. "You are not just repairing," the architect realized. "You are teaching time how to heal itself." Null smiled, his dark eyes holding the afterglow of 100,000 suns. Then, without a sound, he stepped into the next fracture, a seam in reality so faint even the architects had missed it. The void where he'd stood trembled, then stilled, smoother than before. Far away, in a reality not yet born, a mother rocked her infant to sleep beneath unfamiliar constellations. The baby giggled, clutching at the air as if catching something none could see. Outside, the night was quiet. The clocks kept perfect time. The probe's broken hull tumbled through the void, its cracked sensors still drinking in the light of the newborn star. For centuries, it had drifted, a silent witness to the celestial rebirth unfolding around it, supernova dissolving into nebulas, black holes exhaling forgotten matter. the very fabric of space-time knitting itself smoother at the edges. Then, as if stirred by an unseen hand, its last functioning transmitter sputtered to life. The signal pulsed once, weak but clean, slicing through the interstellar silence like a knife through dark water. Cale's voice emerged from the static, not as the crew remembered it, weathered by command and loss but lighter, almost buoyant, as though unshackled from gravity itself. "If you hear this, don't mourn." A pause, filled only with the whisper of cosmic background radiation. "We became more." The words hung in the vacuum, weightless and certain. Then the static surged, a tidal wave of white noise threatening to drown the message entirely. But just before it vanished, one syllable rang through, clear as a bell struck in deep space: Null. The word rippled outward, bending the fabric of reality in its wake. On a research outpost 6 light-years away, a child's holographic star chart flickered to life without power, tracing a path back to the probe's coordinates. In a derelict shipyard, a half-dismantled AI core booted itself for the first time in decades, whispering the name like a prayer. And at the edge of known space, where the stars grew thin and the dark between them stretched endless, the architects bowed their luminous heads, not in grief but reverence. The probe's signal looped 3 times before its dying battery gave out. Each repetition carried a subtle shift in timbre, as though Cale's voice were smoothing, refining, growing cleaner with every cycle. By the 3rd iteration, there was no static at all, just a man's voice woven with something older, wiser, untethered from linear time. The final transmission wasn't a distress call. Wasn't a warning, it was an invitation etched into the silence between the words. When the probe's husk finally disintegrated in the pulsar's golden glow, the debris didn't scatter. It danced, swirling into delicate, impossible patterns before vanishing, not destroyed but rewritten. Far away, in a kitchen on a quiet colony world, a woman froze with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. She couldn't say why her eyes stung. Couldn't explain why the name Null rose unbidden to her tongue, sweet and strange as a half-remembered lullaby. Outside her window, the stars burned a fraction brighter, their light falling across her cheeks like a long-awaited answer. The little girl's fingers traced the Starship's silhouette in the wet sand, her brow furrowed with concentration. "See," she murmured, pressing a seashell into the curve of the hull. "It's called Eon's Grace. It flies where time forgets to tick." Her mother's shadow loomed over the drawing, blocking the twin sun's light. "Sweetheart," she said, voice tight with the tone adults use when humoring children, "that's not a real ship." The girl didn't look up. "Not yet," she whispered. That night, as the colony's automated harvesters whirred through the fields and the night shift nurses checked their monitors, every chronometer on the planet stuttered. Just 1 second, barely enough for most to notice, but in the orbital traffic control hub, technicians scrambled as 1,000 ship transponders blinked out, then reappeared with identical error logs, timestamp corruption. 1 second lost, the lead engineer ran diagnostics until dawn, her coffee cooling beside screens that insisted nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, the girl slept fitfully, her sheets tangled around her like the ribbons of light she'd seen in her dream. The same ribbons that had spiraled from the fingertips of a smiling boy with eyes like the void between galaxies. She didn't remember waking to press her palm against the bedroom window, nor the way her reflection flickered just for a heartbeat into someone else entirely. Older, sadder, clutching a broken star chart. By morning, the sand drawing had vanished, erased by the tide. But in the planet's deepest seismic sensors, buried beneath miles of rock, a single anomaly registered at the exact moment the clocks had paused, a vibration unlike any earthquake. A pulse, rhythmic, deliberate, as if something vast, something patient, had taken a breath beneath their feet. The girl's mother found her at breakfast, humming a tune no one had taught her. When asked, the child just smiled and tapped her temple. "From the boy in the dark," she said, "he's teaching me how to count the cracks in time." Outside, the wind carried the scent of ozone and something older burning metal, maybe, or the electric tang of a starship's exhaust. The mother shivered, though the day was warm. Somewhere overhead, hidden in the glare of the suns, a satellite's lens refocused automatically, capturing a blur where nothing should have been. A shadow with wings, a ship that didn't exist, not yet. The astronomer's hands shook as the equations on her holoscreen unraveled before her, each variable twisting back into place, every constant recalibrating to values she didn't recognize. The supernova on her feed, which had blazed across the quadrant just moments ago, now collapsed inward, its fury folding back into the core like a cosmic inhale. The light hadn't faded, it had retreated, as though the universe had pressed rewind on a mistake too glaring to ignore. Her comms erupted with overlapping voices from observatories across the spiral, each more frantic than the last. "It's not just this one," a colleague stammered. "Every telescope past the Kuiper line is picking up reversals, novas, black hole emissions, even quantum decay in deep space probes, all flipping backward like time itself is editing." She barely registered the words, her gaze locked onto the data stream's timestamp where the numbers flickered between two dates, one she knew and one that made her stomach lurch. The second was her birthday, 37 years ago. The screen refreshed and a headline materialized in the feed, crisp as if typed by an unseen hand. Time corrects its own mistakes. The font wasn't any standard interface. It looked handwritten, charcoal smudges at the edges like the words had been pressed onto the screen by fingers dusted with starlight. Across the galaxy, the phenomenon repeated. On a mining outpost's rusted monitors, technicians watched a rogue asteroid's impact crater smooth itself shut, the ground rising like bread dough in reverse. In a university lab, a biologist gaped as a fossilized skeleton in her scanner regrew its flesh, not in the messy, organic way of life, but in precise layers, as though reassembled by a craftsman who'd memorized every bone. The universe wasn't just rewinding, it was repairing. Back at her station, the astronomer traced the headline's letters. The moment her fingertip brushed the screen, a whisper coiled through her mind. Not sound, but sensation, like the hum of a plucked string. It carried no words, just an impression, gratitude, and beneath that, something darker, a warning. Outside the viewport, the corrected star pulsed once, its light warmer now. Gold instead of blue, familiar. She'd seen that hue before, in the afterglow of a child's laughter. The thought made no sense, it also made perfect sense. Her console chimed, a new notification from no sender she could trace. Just two words blinking in that same smudged font. "Keep counting," the star winked out. Not gone, just finished. Somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, a clock she couldn't hear began to tick. Null walked through the city's skeletal remains, his bare feet leaving no prints in the dust of collapsed centuries. Towers of glass and steel stood frozen mid-crumble, their shadows stretching like stretched fingers across the ground. The people were statues caught between breaths, a woman's head thrown back in laughter, a vendor's hand outstretched with an apple that had long since turned to ashen carbon. Time had gnawed at the edges of everything, leaving only the bones of a world that once pulsed with life. He pressed his palm to a fractured wall. The stone shivered under his touch, cracks reversing like scars healing before his eyes. The city inhaled, streets stitching together, rust flaking backward into polished metal, laughter bubbling up from silent throats. For a heartbeat, the plaza lived again. Voices overlapping, music spilling from open windows, the scent of spice and ozone thick in the air. Then stillness reclaimed it, as if the universe had blinked and missed the moment entirely. The architects materialized from the hollows between ruins, their luminous forms casting no light on the gray ground. "Enough," the tallest murmured, its voice the sound of pages turning in an endless library. "You cannot resurrect what was meant to fade." Null tilted his head, watching a moth trapped mid-flight over a lamppost. With a flick of his wrist, its wings beat once more, just once before time seized it again. The child's smile was neither kind nor cruel. It was the smile of a sculptor stepping back from an unfinished work. "Never," he said, and the word unraveled into the wind, stitching itself into the fabric of the dying world. Around them, the city trembled, not with collapse but with possibility. Somewhere beyond the ruins, a clock that hadn't ticked in millennia let out a single, shuddering tock. The universe exhales slow, silent, inevitable. Stars are born and die in the same breath, their light stretching across millennia only to dissolve into the quiet between galaxies. Yet in that stillness something stirs. A ship's engines hum to life, their vibrations resonating through the eons Grace's newly forged hull. The crew moves with the crisp efficiency of those who don't yet know they're part of a story older than the cosmos itself. In the navigation array, a star blinks into existence, one that shouldn't be there, according to every chart in the databanks. The coordinates glitch for a heartbeat, then stabilize, as if the universe itself is adjusting the path. On a distant world, a child's fingers close around a scrap of paper pulled from the tide. The ink is fresh despite the sea's relentless embrace, the words unmistakable, launch sequence initiated. The child doesn't question it, they never do. Above them, the sky flickers not with lightning or meteors, but with something subtler, a rearrangement. A correction, as if the fabric of reality is being darned by an invisible hand. And in the deepest dark, where time frays like worn cloth, a silhouette waits. Small, still, eyes like event horizons. The architects call him Null, but names are clumsy things in a place where cause and effect hold no meaning. He watches the Grace's trajectory with something like recognition. Or perhaps it's anticipation. The ship will arrive, it always does, just as the star will be there to greet it, though it hasn't yet been born. Somewhere, a clock ticks backward. Somewhere else, it hasn't been wound at all. The universe doesn't bother with paradoxes, it simply unfolds again and again, stitching its wounds with light and forgetting the scars. The child smiles, not because he knows how the story ends, but because he knows it never really began. Far away, the eons Grace's comms crackle to life, spitting static and a voice no one aboard recognizes. It's familiar all the same, welcome home, it whispers just before the star ahead pulses once, twice, like a heartbeat finally finding its rhythm.